Okay.
I'll take a water.
All right.
Thank you.
Can you guys hear me? Can everyone hear me? Is this on? Okay.
Oops, sorry.
All right, we are going to try to get started.
You know where to find me.
Actually, I do, but I don't like to do the drop-ins.
Yeah.
You know.
You want me to test again? Okay. All right. This is a huge group, so before we get started, just can people hear me?
Barely.
Door's always open.
Barely? Okay, can you turn it up even more?
I don't know. Could be a first.
Even louder, how's that? Okay,
Yeah.
excellent. So I think, good evening.
Sort of like Alex.
I have not done this, I've not done this meeting before in person, but my understanding is what we're going to need to do is each board is going to need to call their own meeting to order. So we can, yeah? Yep, so we can go around and do that, and then we'll get started.
Mention that you don't have a quorum, so you're present.
Maybe showing up at some point, I don't know.
Are you guys okay?
Yes, sorry.
No worries. Oh, okay. Okay. All right, so at this point, I would like to call this meeting of the Hamilton Wenham Regional Schools Committee to order at 7:05 on, 7:06 on, I'm sorry, 6:35 on Wednesday, November 30th, 2022. And we will go, I don't know, Wenham?
And I'll call the Wenham Select Board to order with all three members present. Call the Wenham Finance Committee to order with 4 members present.
I'll call the Hamilton Select Board to order with 3 members present.
And the Hamilton FinCom does not have a quorum, so we can't officially call our meeting to order. So,
Okay. Noted. Okay. So the agenda is a simple one. I don't know, I'll look to the room as to what. Okay. Yep. I was going to say, what I anticipate is that Vinny's going to get started and give a brief overview of the budget, the initial budget recommendation, and then we'll have a good conversation. Oh, I'm sorry, Vinny. I should say this meeting is being recorded and live streamed.
Thank you guys for joining us tonight. We're obviously here to get a deeper look at all 3 of our budgets and see what the impact is for both communities for FY24. Hopefully you all got a chance to review my more detailed presentation that I gave to the school committee on November 17th, along with the detailed line-by-line account analysis. This is more just a summary of that same presentation, so hopefully, again, you all got a chance to review the more in-depth presentation. So tonight's main objectives for us, to review the changes in our enrollment shift, to also go over all of our offset and revenue projections, and to review some of the major increases and decreases as it relates to our expenses. So when we first build our budget, the first thing we look at is our enrollment shift. We really try to take this into consideration when we review our budget, because this really is what drives that bigger increase over our net increase between the 2 towns. Whichever way the shift is going, you'll see that that increase is a little larger than what our overall net increase is. So for here, I just broke out the change in Hamilton year over year. So on October 1, 2021, Hamilton had a total student enrollment of roughly 1,078 students. Turn the page 1 year on October 1st, 2022, and that enrollment actually dropped to 1,064, which represents a reduction of approximately 14 students, or a little bit more than 1% overall. Turning the page to Wenham, they saw a reduction of approximately 3 students, which for them represents a reduction of a little bit less than 0.5%, with their total enrollment on October 1, 2022, coming in at roughly 539 students. Now combining the two, year over year, the entire district saw a reduction of roughly 17 students, which combined is a drop of approximately 1.4% of our total resident enrollment. Again, this is just resident enrollment and does not include any of our school choice in or preschool tuitioned in students. This is just the resident enrollment, which is how we come up with our assessment. So what does the enrollment shift do? We look at here at our the agreement between both of us. I'm drawing a blank right now, sorry. But yeah, the agreement with both of us says to look past our 3-year rolling average on our assessment. For that means we add on our enrollment as of October 1, 2022, and we take off our enrollment as of October 1, 2019. So doing this, we come up with a new 3-year average of roughly 66.23% Hamilton and 33.77% Wenham. Overall, that's a shift of roughly 0.83%, but what does that mean in dollars? When you apply that to our current FY23 budget, so if nothing changed, turn the page from 23 to 24, and the only thing you took into consideration was the enrollment shift, we would actually see a reduction to Wenham of roughly $281,000, and that amount of money is going towards Hamilton and increasing their overall budget of roughly $281,000. In other words, right out of the gate, you can see that Hamilton is going to go up roughly 1.27%, while Wenham goes down roughly 2.4%. So the next thing we look at is all of our offsets and revenues. If you do look at the more detailed budget, this is broken out in 2 different sections on that report. For now, I just rolled it all into one chart to put all of our revenue and offsets on one page. Overall, we are seeing an increase of roughly $166,000, or roughly 1.75%. I'm going to go over the items that are changing here. Just starting from the top, we are seeing an overall reduction of our school choice in by approximately 4 students. On average, we receive roughly $5,000 per student. So right now, we are projecting a reduction in our school choice in of approximately $20,000. The next item to change is around our ESSER grants, which again comes from the CARES Act and the pandemic relief. At the end of this fiscal year, FY23, the ESSER grant will end. So we are reducing our budget by approximately $147,000 as it relates to the ESSER grant. This is also tied to 2 positions at the elementary level. At this time, in the initial budget request, we are not asking to fund those positions. We are removing them from the budget, so this $147,000 matches a reduction of approximately 2 FTEs at the elementary level. Next item to change is our circuit breaker offset. This relates to reimbursements from special ed expenses we incurred in the prior year. So as our special ed expenses increase, so do our circuit breaker offset as a revenue source. Just to be transparent, we are, over the next month, reviewing numbers that have been put out by the state, and we confidently think we will be able to change this number and raise it a little bit more before the final budget is due. But right now, for the initial budget, we are realizing an increase of approximately 11%. The next major item is around our transportation reimbursement. You can see on here, there's actually 2 different lines for our transportation. It's in there as the line I'm going through now for $425,000, as well as 2 lines below it, a reduction of approximately $382,000. Netting the 2 together, it is still an increase of approximately $42,000. The reason for reporting it this way is if you look at our detailed budget, it's being moved from a general fund revenue source to a reoccurring offset. The reason for this is because at the end of FY22, the district reached the maximum allowable amount to roll over in our revolving account. Therefore, we move it from a general fund revenue source to an offset. It's kind of just a technicality from the Department of Education. The next item is around our Chapter 70 aid, where we're seeing a modest increase of approximately $49,000, or roughly 1.3%. The next item is our Medicaid reimbursements. This number has been a little volatile since the pandemic first hit. As soon as it hit, we saw a real decline in our Medicaid reimbursements. Since the pandemic has subsided this year, we are seeing an uptick again. So we're confident that we can project an increase of approximately $50,000 as it relates to Medicaid. The last item to change is around our excess and deficiency, where we're seeing an increase year over year of approximately $72,000, and this mainly relates to all the vacant positions that the school district realized last year. We had a very difficult time hiring staff and keeping them in-house, so we had a lot of leftover salary funds that is contributing a lot to the increase in our excess and deficiency. So again, overall, we're seeing an increase of roughly $166,000 as it relates to our revenue sources. The next item is around our expenses, which is broken out in two different areas. First, I'll go through briefly the operating and then our debt service. So right now, I've presented to you our operating budget in DESI format, which is again a requirement by the Department of Education that a regional school district presents their budget this way, and it's approved by the school committee, broken out into each of the DESI categories. So overall, our initial budget request is incorporating an increase of approximately $1.7 million, or roughly 4.16%. But what is contributing to that overall change of approximately $1.7 million? Again, hopefully you looked at my more detailed presentation where I literally broke out almost every single expense in every single category across all of our 5 schools. Here, I just tried to develop a summary chart. Right now, I'm not going to hit on every single one of them, but obviously as we go through questions, feel free to ask about any of them. But just starting from the top, we have incorporated a one-time E&D offset for FY24 as it relates to funding our capital stabilization fund. We're at this time requesting approximately $1.7 million be transferred into the capital stabilization fund, which is the maximum amount allowed in FY24. Just to stay on the same pattern as our one-time E&D offsets, there are a total of 4 one-time E&D offsets being incorporated in the budget. The first one, again, being the capital stabilization. Another one is our high school auditorium project, where Hamilton houses their annual town meeting. Another one is the Bucher School Auditorium, where Wenham houses their annual town meeting. And last is our district-wide smart board replacement project. This relates to around about 10 years ago. We did a massive project around our smart boards and replaced them across the district. Most of these smart boards only have a 7-year life cycle, so a lot of them are failing right now, so we would like to get a head start on it and replace them almost entirely across the district, but we're going to focus mainly on the high school, middle school, and then with any leftover funds, come here to Bucher, kind of staying away from Cutler and Winthrop, obviously because they've been invited into the MSBA project. So right now it's just to fund the 3 schools, sorry. Another big ticket item that always is incorporated in our budget is around salaries. The biggest one obviously is our COLAs. For FY24, for the approximately 305 FTEs that are currently incorporated in our FY24 budget, we are realizing a overall COLA cost increase of roughly $427,000. This ranges across bargaining units. Some got a 2% COLA, some got a 1-1 split, but overall the increase we're realizing is roughly $427,000. Another big ticket item around staff and payroll is the step increases. As of FY24, we have 108 employees that are eligible for a step increase next year. The combined total cost for these 108 employees is approximately $264,000. To offset some of these increases, we are realizing retirement savings incorporated in our initial budget for 2 employees is accumulating to approximately $28,000. The deadline to submit your retirement is December 1st. We have received 3 more retirements that are not incorporated in this current chart, but will be incorporated into the final budget, so you will see this number increase before the final budget is presented. But again, right now, we're realizing savings of approximately $39,000. In addition to that, between last year and this year, we had over 49 positions turnover. So every time this happened, we tried to be strategic about it and bring in a staff member that would be lower on the salary scale. This overall resulted in a net savings of approximately $82,000 when you spread it across the 49 positions. In addition to that, Eric, myself, and the district leadership team really tried to scrub through our FTEs. As you saw on a few slides before, our enrollment is dropping. We realized that, and we really tried to incorporate that and look through our staffing, and we strongly believe we'll be able to reduce our overall FTEs by approximately 7.3 in total. This represents a savings for FY24 of approximately $225,000. In addition to those is the last 2 items. Obviously, we are removing the FY23 one-time offsets for E&D that we all talked about last year, which is $325,000 for our extraordinary maintenance and $2 million for our OPEB fund. Again, the second side of the expense category is our debt service. Year over year from FY23 to FY24, we are requesting an initial budget increase of approximately $270,000. If you look through this chart, there is a new item at the very bottom. It's the Cutler feasibility study that was approved in the last town meeting. But currently, we are in discussions with both finance directors from both towns, as well as the treasurer from the regional school district and the MSBA. And we're really trying to map out the timeline of the feasibility study and when we will incur the costs. Right now, the hope is that we don't have to borrow for this money until January of 2024, which would then mean there will not be a need for a payment in FY24, and the first payment would be in FY25. So stay tuned on that. This bottom line might be removed, which ultimately would mean a debt service budget increase of approximately $24,000. So wrapping it all together, what does it all mean when you break it out, and what's the final assessment as it relates to our initial budget request? So for that, you just kind of start at the top. Where did we end the prior year? Where did we end FY23? Our FY23 net assessment combined between both towns is approximately $34 million. Again, the very first thing we try to look at is our enrollment shift. You can see here what that effect has on both communities. The next thing is the new split between the increases in offsets and revenues. And then last are changes in our overall expenses. You bake in these 3 steps. Ultimately, it ends in an assessment to Hamilton of approximately $23.7 million, which represents an increase of approximately 6.89%. For Wenham, it's an increase of for Wenham, the total is approximately $12.1 million, which represents an increase of 3.02%. And overall, for the combined for the school district's net assessment in our initial budget is approximately 5.55%. Just to remind everyone, this is our initial budget. There will be a lot of work between now and February when the final budget's approved. So hopefully a lot changes between now and then, but overall, our initial budget request is sitting at approximately 5.55%. That kind of does it for the school district. I'll hand it over to Wenham first, once I pull up their presentation.
You want to go last?
All right, thank you.
I'm going to take like half that time. Red dye is their finance.
Tested it, though.
Did I have it upside down?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Easy
Not a good
fix,
start.
easy fix.
Okay. We have a brief presentation, several sections. We'll repeat a little bit of the information that Vinnie just reviewed. First, let's go to the major budget drivers for Wenham. The school budget and the Essex Tech will increase approximately 4% with an increase in the number of students. And as Vinnie indicated, the Wenham's share of the budget at 12 million plus will go up approximately 3%. We do have the enrollment shift, which reduces by 3 students, which reduces our appropriation somewhat. There also could be the possibility of unforeseen school capital needs, which would also drive our budget. Health insurance. Maya has given us a number of approximately a 10% increase in our health insurance premiums and expenses. We've also seen in the past 12 months an increase in the use of major health services by our employees, surgical requirements, doctor's visits, preventative care, and so on. The utilities, which will affect clearly all of us here. From the National Grid, we have received a number of a 64% increase in our utilities at this point in time. Some high-level revenue assumptions. We've built in a new revenue assumption, a new growth assumption of $250,000, $250,000, based upon new housing starts that have come online and are now taxable. And with the new shared inspectional service with Hamilton, we've seen improved captured construction projects that have gone on throughout the community. We see no significant changes in the local receipts. In the past, in 21, the last year we've used free cash for operations when it was in fiscal year 21. We didn't use free cash in operations in 22, nor in the current fiscal year, and we anticipate and want to continue that practice. We'll use the free cash for identified capital requirements. We set aside every year approximately $195,000 for abatements. And of course, our real estate tax revenue, which equates to approximately 97% of our revenues, will remain stable. And we've had excellent experience over the last 2 years with COVID and so on, and changes in employment with our tax revenues coming in as anticipated in prior years. Some expenditures. We see on the average 0 to 3% increases in our overall expenses. Personnel will increase in the range of 2 to 4 points, 2 to 4%. Varies by department. We have coming up in the spring collective bargaining negotiations with police, fire, and the library. So we will be anticipating and thinking about those potential numbers as we build our budget. Non-union employees, we typically put aside 2% for cost of living adjustments and 2% for an approved and gained merit. Health insurance, as I think I mentioned, is up 10 points. And we're going to, we chip away at our OPEB liability. Last year we had 80,000 in that, and this year we are expending 90. So, our annual revenues at this point in time, not including potentially one-time funds, is 23.2 million, rounded up. Our appropriations at this point are 24.1 million and change, rounded up, which leaves us with a structural deficit at this point of approximately just slightly over $905,000. So once again, the revenues have increased approximately for us at this point 2.3 points, 2.3%, and our expenses have increased at this point 5.1%. So that leaves us with that stated deficit. We will be meeting Saturday, December 10th, with all department heads for an all-day meeting to review all the budgets that they've presented thus far. We'll be looking at variances in the budget that are over the 3 to 4 points and review those very carefully. And then starting in January through February, we'll be having weekly meetings to review the detail of the budget and see where we are at the end of that point, including of course, on the revenue side as we go forward. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you. So like you, we're in our preliminary budget phase right now. We've got some good numbers, but they're projections, and we have some room to work on them. Okay. The FY24 budget summary is as follows. Our FY24 budget remains a work in progress with expected changes over the coming weeks. We have goals of level service budget and to deliver the same services for all residents in the town as we have in prior years. We are projecting revenues for the town of Hamilton to be $37,424,057. Currently, we're projecting expenses, including the preliminary school budget, at $38,134,398, which is a deficit of about $710,000. This screen is probably not helpful to you on the screen, but I gave you all handouts, so hopefully you'll be able to look at it. The yellow column in the middle is our current projection for expenses in various departments. So public safety, public works, health and human services, culture and recreation. You can see on this in the far right corner the relative percentages of the budget that each department takes up in the Hamilton budget. This is a visual example of the table above, and this speaks to the percentages. The school department, the school department combined between Essex, Aggie, and the regional district make up 63% of our budget. We're going to try a different one. See if this works better. So far, so good. So that's the basic nuts and bolts of our budget this year. We're about $710,000 away from being able to balance without an override. Similar to what Wenham has projected, we're projecting regular 2.5% growth, some mild growth in local receipts. Real estate revenue makes up 95% of our budget, so that's the only place we have to grow. We have similar free cash policies. We have a policy that's adopted by the town to not use free cash to balance operating budget. Instead, we direct our free cash to capital purchases and one-time expenses. The budget that we just laid out for you does not include several things that we have come to realize the town needs. It does not include a full-time conservation agent. It does not include a full-time health director. It does not include expanded IT. We currently have a part-time consultant who lives out of state as our IT department. It does not include a full-time HR director. We share our HR director with the towns of Rockport and Manchester. And we currently spend less money on our senior center than in any other department in town. We have new staff there, and we'd like to be able to expand programming, but we don't right now have the money to do that in a balanced budget. So I think we all realize that we're all in preliminary phases. We're all working on our budgets to refine them and bring them in. I just hope that we all sharpen our pencils and get a little bit tighter, because I think it'd be a difficult year to look for an override. We know what's coming down the pike in terms of the school project. Everybody on this side of the equation is in favor of that school project. We want to see the new school get built. I'm excited to become part of the school building committee and move that project forward. But asking for an operational override right before we ask for a $100 million capital project might be a little bit difficult. So I'm hoping that we can work together to get this budget to where we can balance. Our revenues aren't going to increase much, so it's only going to be able to be adjusted on the expense side. So,
Okay. Thank
questions?
you. Thank you. So I don't know how we want to go about doing this, but I think the idea is to have, Eric, I will look to you if you have thoughts, but I think the idea is to have an opportunity for everybody to ask questions. Yeah. Oh, hold on a second. Are you going up, Benny?
Just gotta get it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Do questions by.
So I think, I mean, if it makes sense to the group, maybe we'll just, start at the beginning, and we'll have first questions for the schools, and then we can ask, if that makes sense, if people have questions directed towards the school budget, we can start there, and I don't know. I'm open if other people have other ideas, but yes.
Hi, this is John McGrath from the Hamilton FinCom. I think the fact that we're all here together is a really good sign. And I think we're at an unprecedented point with school on the horizon and an appetite on all three towns, or all three entities, to improve the school facilities and do everything we can. So rather than sort of dwell on numbers and spending in the past, I really wanted to advocate for more frequent meetings like this, where the let's just say the 5 leaders can help us get through the next 10 years of spending. Because if you kind of look at a $100 million school plus all the other capital needs of both towns, I think it's only going to be solved by the 5 entities working together on a regular basis, not just like once a year. So I really advocate, how can we improve the fields, fix the roof, build a school, make sure the Hamilton water plant is taken good care of, make sure the things that Wenham needs is taken care of. So, I would really advocate that all 3 entities feel each other's pain and try to chart a course where we can try to get everything done that each town really needs. And The last item Joe mentioned, and I wanted to just highlight this because we talked about it last night, was in Hamilton, we have been underserving our old folks, and I put myself in that category. We have really been taking real good care of our young folks in the school. So that's sort of something that stuck in my mind over the last 24 hours because I think I heard Joe and Carolyn mention it. So anyway, I know I'm rambling, but I really hope that the 5 chairs can help us get through the next 10 years because it's 120 some odd $1 million of spending partially funded by the state that we're putting on the table, and we need to figure out how can we get it all done. But let's not forget our old folks while we do this, not just, those folks under 18. So anyway, that's my little soapbox speech for tonight, and that's all I'll say.
I'm going to jump in on this, only, John, I'm glad you said that. You must have been listening to a conversation Joe and I had earlier. We are sending emails out tomorrow morning to the 5 chairs to be able to connect sometime next week to have that longer distance conversation about what the next 3 to 5 years financially looks like between the 3 entities to try to find that balance point. We understand Wyndham's trying to do projects, Hamilton's trying to do projects, we're trying to do projects. So I think you're right, you're 100% right. We need to be able to have these meetings more consistently to lay that groundwork and build the plan that we all can agree to and balance and sell to the community so that they understand that we're all working together. So
Yeah,
check emails tomorrow if you're a chair.
The key takeaway that I just heard is both towns are currently in an override situation, so right out of the box, right? So maybe we'll be able to make that go away. But I guess over the next 10 years, are we assuming that we probably have to go to both towns with a big override in order to pay for the school? I think the answer is yes. And when we met a month ago, we talked about, is there a really good communication plan to inform voters of both towns of what's coming? How can we build up a groundswell of support, or at least information, so people know what's coming down the pike? Now, our finance committee spent some time back in the spring laying out capital spend out through 2030 and the cost of it all. And it's pretty sobering. Given the tax bases that we have. So I'd really like to see a sort of 6 or 8 year pro forma plan, and Vinny can probably do it in his sleep if we asked him, of how much funding needs to come from each town in order to get the school up and running while keeping the excellent education programs running. So I really think a multi-year projection, if we could have the finance folks come together and work on that to support the overall chair activity, that I think would be a great step forward. So anyway.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, are there questions on the, yeah, Gary?
Is this hot now, I believe?
Yes.
So I think as kind of echoing that thing, that we also need to look at the effects of inflation that are just starting to hit us now. We've seen the utility bills and some of the small items, but certainly we know that there's going to be wage demands over the next 2 or 3 years that are really going to drive the budget as well. So I'd say the same thing, that we really need to take a long look out, multi years, and see where we're going to be, because I think the public needs to know ahead of time here that we are facing perhaps multiple years of, overrides of one sort or another.
Okay. All right, Anna?
Thank you, Dana. I have a question for Joe and the Hamilton side, just a little. I just want to make sure I'm understanding yours correctly. Right now, you're projecting the school ask of Hamilton is $24,060,859. Is that right?
Yep.
So right now, according to Vinny's current projected budget, the Hamilton ask is actually less than that by about $316,000. So when you talk about sharpening pencils, are you looking for additional cuts to get a lower delta? Because right now, our ask of Hamilton is actually less than you're projecting, unless I'm misreading it.
No, you're not misreading. That's our entire school.
Oh, okay.
It's our world of school.
Oh, okay.
That's Essex technically.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
Just so everyone knows, we're expecting a one less enrollment there, so we're carrying our FY23 number forward at Essex Aggie.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't actually hear what that last sentence, what'd you say?
We're expecting one less enrollment at Essex Aggie out of Hamilton, and so they said we should carry our FY23 number forward into 24, and that would be safe to do.
Meaning we'll get one less seat?
One less seat.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You want to talk school enrollment?
Other people?
So one other question noted in the enrollment numbers, a severe loss, 25% of our 8th graders going up to 9th grade are disappearing, so that essentially every year in high school we have 100 or less students, which is certainly a lot lower than historically there. We got plans in place to retain those students, to have some sort of efficiency, or where's the cost there?
So this year, they actually, at the high school level, did a fairly substantial open house in which, for the first time, 200 families attended. And they put it all out there to try and, make sure that people saw all aspects of the school. There's a lot of assumptions out there that people didn't understand, that we had a STEM program, robotics, fabrication program for kids going into engineering, 3D printing, all of these things that people are looking for. They didn't realize that we had, so we were able to kind of open the doors a lot wider and have that discussion with people that came in. So, like I said, 200 families came in that were invited in from the 8th grade and other private schools, and it was an opportunity for the high school to kind of open the doors, share information. There's also, you'll see by the time we're done, there'll continue to be some staffing reductions. You can see in our current budget's what, 7.5 from just now, right now, compared to last year. Tomorrow night, school committee meeting, and we're doing a class size report, which, if you take a look at that, you'll kind of see the direction we're moving in the next few weeks. When we need to really just look at each of the buildings, look at actual class sizes. So again, publicly, it's all out there. It's just a matter of how we move through our budget process. We're just going through each of those steps right now.
Thank you.
Just a real quick question. Do we know what the trends are in our neighboring school systems about reduction of student population? And have there been any kind of recent, I would call it study, I guess, of how the COVID pandemic impacted our student population? And is there any sense that that may be recovered at all in the near term or even in the longer term?
So oddly, I can answer that. I was with a state agent today that we were going through Chapter 70 and projections into the future, and the pandemic impact in the state of Massachusetts impacts just about every public school. If you start to go around and ask schools, everybody suffered some level of loss. Overall, across the state, 38,000 kids were lost from the public school system over the last year and a half, 18 months or so. So that's a huge number. That's a big drop. And as you know, the state aid is calculated on these numbers, and it's a huge piece of the puzzle. Nobody knows. That was part of our conversation. What does it look like in the future? It's very hard to predict who might come back from a different placement, like in a private school placement or an independent school placement. We lose a higher number of kids to the tech last year. Usually we have 6, usually it's 3 and 3, fairly predictable. Out of the blue last year, it was 14. So those types of things are hard to anticipate, but it's a loss that's a statewide loss. It's a big factor that the MASS, the Mass Association of School Superintendents, we were having this discussion today just to figure out, like, okay, how can we figure out where these kids are and where they're coming back? So we know where most of them are. We do a district-wide survey, so we can tell you that over 300 kids are off in various private and independent schools, tech schools, school choice as well. We have a number of kids out in school choice. number of kids that are still homeschooled. We have over 25 families that homeschool their kids. Some are just starting to come back now. So it's trickling, but there's no way to really predict, like, who's comfortable coming back, who's not, or who's financially, some people are just financially able to just send their kids pretty consistently for the 4 years. Some end up coming back, so it's kind of this waiting game. In some ways, there's no way to predict it.
Actually, a couple questions that I had. First one's probably to Vinnie. First of all, Vinnie, thank you for the detail that you put into the presentation. Really appreciate that, sort of seeing the year-to-year line item changes. On that note, I may have gotten lost in the detail because just looking at the higher level, the pupil services DESI category had a really big year-over-year increase. And I was wondering how that what sort of comprises that, if you could talk to that a little bit.
Yep, that's the transportation.
Okay.
So last year, we went out to bid on our 3-year contract. It was awarded to Salter. They were the kind of lowest bidder providing the services, and it was a 13.5% rate hike. So a lot of that is contributed to that. In addition, Student Services is projecting 4 new routes for out-of-district transportation. Each one of those additional routes range between anywhere to $30,000 to $60,000 a year. So that's what the bulk of that increase is transportation.
Okay.
And Vinnie, to clarify, Salter was also not only the lowest bid, were they not the only bid?
They were
we
the
received?
only, lowest and only.
Right, so just to think we didn't take a higher bid, they were the only option presented to us.
We've been there before.
Yes.
Another question I had, in terms of the transfer into the capital stabilization fund, what was in terms of setting that number, was there any detail on how that you came up with that number? Since that seems to be a potentially a big swing in the budget.
The number that's budgeted right now?
Yeah, the 1.7
Yeah, that's the
million.
maximum allowable annually. It's 5%.
Yeah, 5% of the combined assessment.
Of the combined assessments, yeah, sorry.
That's the max you can put in.
Okay, gotcha. It was just based on that formula.
Yeah, that's all it was based on, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, in anticipation of a multi-million-dollar project, it's.
Well,
it's-
right, and
it's-
this
yeah,
goes to
that's-
the bigger point of how do we pay for sort of everything.
Right, right.
But that could, certainly within this year, could be toggled. If you brought that down, it would just increase the amount that was returned to the school and lowering the assessment. Okay, just want to make sure there wasn't any specific thing other than the maximum calculation there.
Right. I think on Vinnie's presentation, if you look, there's also kind of a sub-breakdown of some more of that, the E&D breakdown where
Right.
there are some bigger projects as well built in there. Just not in that specific bucket.
Yeah, no, I was only talking about the 1.7.
Yeah, that's what I
I know
figured,
there's
okay.
a bunch of specific projects that are
Yep.
also taking up the E&D. And then one final question, sort of looking forward a little bit. How is FY '23 shaping up in terms of spending versus budget? I know we're getting close to the halfway point. Just in terms of potential forecasted E&D for this year, if there is any.
It's looking similar to '22. We still have right now over 12 vacant positions. So right now, I think we're looking at, I think it was almost $800,000 in salaries alone that we still can't fill. So I think right now, the last forecast, I think I was projecting maybe a $2 million balance,
Sounds about right.
I believe.
Vinnie, if I can ask on those positions, excuse me, on those positions that are unfilled, are they rollovers from previous year, or are they just this year alone?
It's both.
Both.
Yep, some of them are reoccurring that we still couldn't fill last year. A lot of them are part-time, kind of harder to fill positions, like speech-language pathologist, that's only a .7.
Right, I think we talked about that at our last meeting a little bit.
Yeah. I think it's important to note, too, that we've restructured positions. You'll see a 7.5 FTE drop in the budget because we took some of those positions we couldn't fill.
Right.
These part-time, kind of lower salaries combined in the case of two schools, combine 3 TAs into one professional position, because we needed to have somebody in that service position, if you will, that special ed position, to service the kids because of their IEP. So it was much easier for us to hire a full-time teacher than a full-time teacher's assistant at $23 or $24 an hour. So
Right.
we made a couple of those moves just to try to make sure we're meeting the needs of the kids and the requirements of their IEPs too.
It's my first time at a meeting, and I'm first on the first meeting at the Finance Committee. My name's Dano from town of Wenham, but, so just a philosophical question I think I'm wondering when you budget as a school, how do you think about it? What's the kind of drive? Is it, we got to balance a budget, or we're investing for growth so we can put a lot into it because we anticipate a lot of future upside, or is it we have to get ahead and make money so we can put it into other investments? What's the philosophy behind the budgeting?
So the main philosophy is our kids. We looked at what our kids need and what the expectations of our parents are across the district. Actually build in the district goals. We look towards the district goals to see where we're looking for a year out, 2 years out, and trying to decide, like some of our bigger projects are further out, so we're trying to anticipate those. Then you're looking at really trying to figure out to craft the best opportunities for your students. So our schools, as Gary mentioned earlier, we've seen shrinking enrollment. So how do we continue to give them the best services, trimming back a little bit and try to figure out how to plug in those gaps. The one things we run into in the school system is if you try to hire specialty teachers in the areas of music, art, science, PE, health, you can't keep people, you can't hire them. So we look at all those kind of contingencies, if you will, along the way. And then I think to the greater extent, then you start to build around what your expectations are for your school system. So what types of things do you need, like technology? What types of things do you need in your food service department? What types of things do you need across the board in each of the areas? Special ed, which is a huge driver for us, is really a big ticket item that continues to get bigger and bigger along the way. So it's kind of it's multi-pronged if you look at it from that perspective. So if you just roll over a school budget, it's about a 4.5% increase. Just roll it over. Don't add anything new in. This year, budget holders were told they couldn't add anything else in. They had to work with what they had and try to figure out how to reconfigure. So there's a lot of that going on now. Usually in the past, I can only speak for, I've only been superintendent for part of last year and this year, but it's just kind of roll over and add in and move forward. We're looking a little more diligently at the combination of how we work together with the communities now to meet those longer term needs and try to pull that budget into alignment so that Wenham's not going for an override, Hamilton's not going for an override every single year, which happened many, many years ago. There's a lot of different things, like different drivers, if you will, with the biggest one generally being special ed.
Thank you, that helps. I think, to follow up real quick on that, I think hypothetical, if we could, back to your question, Gary, if we knew that if we invest an extra X millions of dollars, it's going to drive growth, more students, more families, more tax revenue, it's going to be better services for our families and all that, then I think everybody would be excited about that, because that's a long-term value for the community. Property values are up, everybody's happy. On the flip side, we got to make that case. If we can't make that case, then it's hard to justify the investment.
If I may, I just want to speak to what you're saying, a little bit about what John was saying too. Speaking just for myself, but as a school committee member, I know it was the first thing Eric said, that when I take any vote, I always think, does it serve the students? How does it serve the students? I've said this before in meetings, but I want to say it again, is that our students are members of our community. And so it's important in this meeting for me to acknowledge that our students are served by living in a community that supports our seniors and shows respect and to our, Council on Aging and our seniors, and our students are served by living in a community that has excellent police and fire, and our students. So I guess I just want to make that, this is all one community, and that mindset, I think, runs deep, that we are truly, yes, every single decision is about how do we serve our students, and that's bigger than only this. I get that all these budgets are important for that. So, anyway. Yep.
I also think it's important for the community to start looking at the options of sharing. Joe shared one thing about an HR director. Well, what if the HR director served the 2 towns and the school department? So those types of things may be worth looking at in the realm of all the things that we're doing together. Possibly save some money, possibly give us some better opportunity or access, at least for employees, things like that. So just one idea. Joe and I had talked about it a couple times in the past. So things like that, I think, are worth looking at. Even when you're looking at maintenance, when you're looking at grounds and buildings and all those types of things that fall into, we're all spending money in those areas. Can we, save money over time by combining those departments, if you will, or at least having some crossover? There's definitely possibilities for conversations around that as well.
Yeah, I think, Eric, we've over the years talked about IT and HR, kind of the bigger ones that we've talked about. We've talked about health insurance as well, but it just isn't, it's cost prohibitive for the school to join with the towns, because I think both towns, Wenham and Hamilton, have kind of an older population of employees, where the schools is a little bit different, so the rate would spike up if we joined. But I think there's possibilities for HR and IT down the road. It's worth talking about.
I want to respond a little bit to Dano too, and a little bit to John and just the group. I think one of the things that I've been surprised by being on the school committee is how little creativity we actually have with our budget. I think looking at it from the outside, you think, my gosh, they have all this money. What are they going to do? And you're describing, sort of an ideal scenario where you actually have time to think about, well, what would my investment be and what's the best return? And I think that's almost an idealized notion of where I hope the district could be. But I think now that I've sat here for almost 3 years to look at it, to realize that somewhere close to 90% of our budget is contractual, right? We don't have a choice. That's where Vinny was saying, if you just roll it over, it is what it is. And then we talk about special education. It's not that we want to do this, it's that we have federal law that governs what students have to receive. And if we don't meet those needs, then we get sued, which would then cost more money. And so when we talk about these sort of, blocks that are huge expenses, it's not that they're huge expenses because we've necessarily chosen them to be, that they are, and we're legally obliged to meet them. So one thing to me that strikes me is where this community is now is we have these sort of immovable blocks that we can't really change much at all year to year. And for many years, the district operated that way. Just, we have to get through, we have to pay, we don't have money to fix that, we can't do this deferred maintenance. But now it's catching up with us sort of almost everywhere, and we're seeing it in our facilities. So I think where we are is an inflection point where the community has to make sort of a generational, very painful investment. And if we could do that and continue to meet sort of those obligatory expenses, then we might get to the point in, say, 5 or 10 years where we could start thinking more proactively. What is the next investment we want to do? What could we do to retain those students? And it's a little bit of a chicken and egg. If we invested in facilities, we know a number of families have left the districts because of athletic facilities. So if we want to return some of those students, we're going to have to put money in, as painful as it is. So I think right now we just have to recognize we have to continue to meet our obligations and plan for the future, and we have some very painful years ahead of us. And at some point, and I think this is beyond the scope of the school committee by itself, but very much within the scope of this awesome group of people, we have to address the revenue issue, which we keep saying, we don't have revenue, we don't have the base, we don't have the base. Well, that has to be addressed. on some really basic level, because if we could address the revenue base, a lot more of these conversations for every department would get better.
I can just say something, and I agree with what you said in terms of it's a fixed number. I mean, you guys did a really good job of defending the budget, so thank you for all your detail. I guess my comment is, you know, I present budgets a lot in my job, right? And they're always over budget. But the last page of the budget's always, hey, if you got to make sacrifices to meet the budget, what is that list of sacrifices? What are the costs of those, and what are the ramifications of those? And so it's, the community or us can go through them and decide, hey, if you want to save $100,000, we get rid of X, Y, and Z. I think it's really the next discussion is like, what would we have to get rid of to save, to not go into override? What is that list, and who makes that list? Do you already have that list somewhere you're not sharing with us, or do we need to make it as a group? But I think it's helpful. It doesn't mean we make those, but it helps us better defend the budget when we say, if you want to go lower, you'd have to get rid of X, Y, and Z, and we can look at those. So I think, and I'm not sure where those discussions have been, but that's, for me, seems like the next logical step, make a list of what things we need to sacrifice, and we decide as a community if we're willing to sacrifice those things. I agree we need to, I mean, personally, I agree we need to make an investment, but on the board, fiscally responsible, we need to look at all options and make sure that maybe we're willing to make a sacrifice this year, and maybe not next year, but it's that look ahead. So that's my comment on the budget.
Sorry, but I think it comes back, not disagreeing with anything you just said, I think it comes back around what Gary's saying about 10 years from now, and to your point about serving students, how are we going to serve the students well 10 years from now? And if there are implications of investing that affect the tax base, then we can't serve students as well 10 years from now, then we're kind of cutting up our noses today to spite our faces.
Mm-hmm.
And I get the whole 90% is unmovable, but it's just hard to accept that we don't have a choice, you know?
I think it's 96% is unmovable.
Peter Clay, Planning Board, Select Board. What has to change, and that's, we have to be delicate with this, we need more commercial development, flat out. That's it. And we have to be really smart about how we do it so that we don't change the nature of how Wenham looks, but that has to fundamentally change. I mean, all you have to do is go look at the facilities at the Ipswich High School, Middle School, all courtesy of New England Biolab. And I'll stop there.
So, in the FinCom, early in the year, we spent some time looking at this question, and really the context was, what would it take to move the needle on our revenue line? First of all, it's a lot, and it won't happen before 2030, all right? Reasonably, it just, you're not going to move the tax number materially in the next 7 years. Even if we make some smart decisions, even if Wenham makes some smart decisions now and brings the New England Biolab in, you know, it's going to take a long time. So that's sort of one point, and we're continuing to dig into that because you may have heard Gordon Conwell is going to be leaving, and some opportunities might show up, and you know, we collectively may decide that Winthrop School goes away and that land is available, you know, so there's a whole bunch of moving things. But I think the bottom line is it's going to take 5 to 10 years if we make decisions now to affect the revenue. So don't get your hopes up. I think you all know this. The other thing that we all have, I believe, is accountability back to the taxpayers, and not just the school-aged taxpayers, it's all the taxpayers. And what I've learned in sort of my first year here is town politics, town meetings, and then town votes are an interesting set of dynamics. And having been living in the town 40 years, I know that when there's a school vote, the schools get the vote, because I did the same thing. So generally, that's a very active voting block when they need the vote, so without a doubt. the one thing that I've been working on personally, and it's something that I sent a late-night email to Vinny and Eric a year ago, having spent 40 years in business and in financial services, you live and die by your numbers, all right? What's not in this presentation anywhere are trended statistics over time that will tell a story, all right? So as we get into the next few town meetings, we feel obliged to basically say, here's where we've been and here's where we're going. So if you look at the spending trends of the towns versus the schools, you know, the trend lines are, you know, like this. The towns are down here and the schools up here. And it's staggering numbers if you do the math. And I think everyone's aware of it, you know. So what we need to do is say, okay, here's what we want to do. Here are the numbers. And if it's just a matter of due diligence, we just need to do it because everyone needs to understand what we're talking about. And I do believe the school needs to put a set of trended statistics in their budget presentations, not just do year over year. So that's best-in-class budgeting. I'll just say it this way, all right? If you're afraid to show your numbers and defend them with value, then you're only telling half the story, all right? So I would recommend that we all sign on to, here are our numbers, here are the rates, here are the ratios of students to staff, here's, you know, teachers and staff, trended costs per. So those are the type of statistics that really need to be in the school budget. So I'll say it here on the record, but if we don't do that, I don't think we can have a really transparent conversation to the taxpayers when we go and ask them for 2 or 3 years' worth of overrides on the school. So just state my case. But if you go back over the last sort of 9 years of spending trends, it's scary in terms of what we've been doing spending-wise. So I'll just leave it at that. Okay.
I appreciate that. I think we all should do that. I think it's important for all of us to put involve the trends and help people to visualize and understand the trends. Because I think even the simple things like the kids that go to the tech, you know, I don't think people realize that the towns pay those separately from the school budget.
I think that's a good story.
And those are stories for people to tell, to say, you know, this is all of a sudden this gigantic jump. I think it was $500,000 on the Wenham side and $325,000 on the Hamilton side, but people don't realize that. It just looks as part of the budget. But I think those are good opportunities for us to be able to say, here are some changes we're seeing. I mean, even you know, I'm trying to this year tell a story without kind of putting parts of my own camp against each other, because I think it's important to say all of our kids are all of our kids, and what they need, and we'll make that happen some way, shape, or form. But the reality is trying to figure out, okay, how does that fit with the two communities? And I think that's important to be able to put that out there to show those overall trends, even though, you know, we all assume that data is available. I can go on the state website and pull all this trend data, but not everybody's doing that. So if we can put it together, and I think it's important that the towns consider including the school department in some of the communication. So if you're sending out a monthly, like maybe there's a school department section where we just add in some highlight for them to learn about or know about in the school department, so that we can start to say, okay, there's an email going out. You know, Hamilton sends out a monthly email or so. There's a school department section. It could be as simple as, you know, here's the budget presentation, but here are some trends that are happening in our schools over 5 years or 8 years or 10 years. I mean, we know enrollment's gone down for 10 straight years. So, you know, do the community members know that who are not involved in the school department? I don't know. I couldn't say yes or no. So I think it's a great idea. I think it's important.
I'm happy to add a superintendent's report to the town manager report. It's bi-weekly though, not monthly. So just have to send it over to you every other
Mine comes
week.
out weekly.
This is weekly.
Every Friday. I'll gladly share it out.
I just have a little bit of an issue with how you presented what you were asking for. I think it's really dangerous to, even with innuendo, say we're trying to hide some data or we don't have the data. And I really think that this is best-in-class budgeting. I just want to stick up for Vinny and Eric. I think that all of this data is available, and potentially we could put it in more of a narrative form that's, you know, maybe sexier for the public, but it's all available and it's all there and it's all transparent and it's year over year over year. And I also think what Eric said is really important. We're not pitting departments against departments. Like, we're not here to say, like, this department is more important than this department, and this department can be sacrificed for this department, or this teacher can be sacrificed for this teacher. We're here to present the budget that we think represents the best ideals and the best services for all of our students. And I really wanted to say that and just really defend Vinny and Eric in that way. So, thanks.
I think the other thing related to all of what we're talking about, not just school department, but town services as well, is, and I'll give Dana credit, she's the one who uses it the most, so I'm cribbing it from you tonight, is the whole idea of seats on the plane, right? There are certain things that have to happen within the town regardless of whether or not the plane is fully full, right? So in a school situation, you know, we had higher enrollments. I'll use AP History as a good example, right? There's an expectation that we are offering a certain class, and if you want to offer a course to the class, you still have to pay for the teacher, whether there's 20 kids in the class or 17 kids in the class or 4 kids in the class, and at some point you have to cut the class. But there are a lot of things like that where even if enrollment fluctuates, the staff that support it remain. The plane is still flying even if it's not full. You get a better value out of flying the plane if you can fill it, obviously, but no matter what, you're going to have certain departments and certain functions, not just in schools, but everywhere too. So I think we have to look at the numbers with a little grain of salt there, because we might have a fixed cost that is somewhat not independent of students, but we're not selling out every seat, even though we're still having to fly the plane in some cases. Credit to Dana Alara for that idea.
I guess.
There's a limit there, right? I mean, right, what do you do if the plane's empty? I know our plane isn't empty, but
No,
right, that logic only.
Right.
Get a smaller plane.
No, that's absolutely right, and that's part of that calculus, right, is like, in that analogy, the assumption is the plane is gonna go, so it's best to get the most value by filling the seats in the plane. But you're right, at a certain point, if there are too few people on that plane, then you're right, then the plane doesn't go.
I mean, people are motivated, people are generous, people are happy to invest. They just got to see the story. In 10 years, we're going to get here, and so let's partner up and try to get there.
Yeah.
So Tom Meyer, Select Board. So just to jump in, because I think there's a lot of people kind of hitting on this around this kind of story, and I think we look at this, and I appreciate everyone's effort on putting this together, and this is a lot of numbers on a page, and I feel like we're talking about stories and like what we're defending and what the important pieces are. And I'm sort of thinking of like what they do on the state level, where you have your budget ask, but you also have your budget memo, where you're putting together a memo. And I'm not trying to put any more work on anyone else, but I'm trying to think about the best way to do it. But you have a budget memo where you defend every single item in here, and you have you can look at your fixed costs, like staffing. That's a cost that's going to be year over year. But you look at like some of the capital expenditures, and I look at like the capital technology project and the smart boards. Like, that sounds important, and that sounds like something that we need, but to what extent do we need that? Are the smart boards, not working right now and they need to be completely replaced? Do we have another couple of years? In some sort of memo, you can defend that, and you can say, okay, this is where we are right now, and this is why we need this, and then it also builds that story. So year over year, you can look at last year's memo, and you can say, okay, this is where we were last year, how can we build on that? And so rather than just looking at these numbers on a page, you actually have that story, and every year you have that memo built in, and you can build off of it. So, I know they do it at the state level, and it's very helpful. It's something that we may want to consider here, so that we can all kind of look at this, but also kind of have a story tied to it.
I was just going to say the annual report that's produced by the district does some of that. I don't know if folks have read it, but it's one of our budget documents that actually goes department by department and it has a little bit more narrative. If that's what you're, I mean, I don't disagree, but that document does exist if folks haven't read it before.
I think it's helpful, all of this is helpful feedback to hear what would feel more transparent, what would feel clearer, not only to the boards, but also to the public, right? What are the, I mean, it's helpful to hear. I'm curious about, forgive me for not knowing, but I'm curious, is that the way, like, does Hamilton do that, have what you just described?
So interesting you ask. We're actually converting our budget document this year. So the budget we're working on right now that we're going to take through town meeting is the same kind of budget we've used before. It's based in the Munis software program that we use to balance our books. But we are converting to what's known as the Government Finance Officers Association Distinguished Budget. So technically what we're doing is we're doing the budget twice right now in tandem. The one that everybody's used to working with that we can get done in time for town meeting, and a more expansive narrated with graphs and tables that explain the budget better. And when we get the budget approved, we send it off to GFOA, they bless it, and we have a GFOA budget to work with going forward. So the FY25 budget will be built in that fashion.
Thank you, that's really interesting, so.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah. It
For him.
sounds like a lot of work. That's helpful. Okay. Yeah, I think we have it. Let's make sure that's true.
Yeah, January 11th.
Yeah, January 11th, 6:30. I assume we're here.
But
Okay.
the 5 chairs in next week sometime.
Yeah, there'll be an email going out tomorrow morning to the 5 chair.
That's great.
Okay. For next week.
That's great.
But yes. Okay. Yes?
I just want to pick up one before we depart. This is an open question, maybe for next time. In terms of marketing and understanding what we do, the high school had an open house for prospective parents. Does anyone feel like there would be value in actually having more of a school open house so that people who are hearing all this talk about the Cutler-Winthrop School, what does it mean? You know, maybe we could actually, I don't know if this is feasible, but could we have an open house for the community to say, look, well, what are you talking about the high school auditorium? Maybe they haven't been to a town meeting. Maybe they don't understand what the need is. What if we had a little bit more of, especially in preparation for these major budget asks, right? I think John touched on it. Well, John, you did, like, huge asks. And if you're going to ask the community for $100 million, you might want to invite them in to say, what are you replacing and why? And I'm not really sure we've provided a great avenue for that. So I just will toss that onto the table. Maybe we should do open houses as budget marketing as much as reasonable for the district. I don't want to make more work for you either, but I think a lot of people haven't been in Cutler School.
Eric-
They don't understand
Yeah, I mean,
what it looks like.
Eric and I talked about this a month ago upstairs. All right?
Yeah.
And basically, I brought it up and said, the new school requires a dedicated community communication effort. So, now, if we do it, say it's here, you might have 5 people coming through the door. But I really do believe, and I think last year, before you finalized the budget, I think you actually had 2 community budget forums, one in each town,
Yep.
right?
We do, and we will again.
I really think that what's coming is so big, we need to, invest in communicating to the communities, all right? I don't know how it's all gonna play out, but I think the program and the budgets are gonna live and die by the communication and the engagement in the 2 towns. How do we sell this appropriately and make it successful so we can get the votes, all right? So I think that is almost bigger than any other element of it, because if you don't have the community support, we're going to struggle. So anyway, I just think put our best foot forward and communicate and offer it out. If no one comes, fine. But I really think these next 2 or 3 years are really important from just a communication standpoint, back to the voters.
I think that's important, and to Anna's suggestion for the kind of open house, I would add a digital/virtual open house, kind of a tour that could be taped, so people can kind of watch it at their leisure if they couldn't make the open house. As many people nowadays like to Zoom or watch something on YouTube. That's all kind of goes a long way for folks. Makes it more convenient.
Yeah.
Okay.
Should we start adjourning, or is there any more questions, comments?
If there are no more questions, I think we could do that.
All right, I'll start the ball rolling here. I'll make a motion, or accept the motion to adjourn for the Hamilton Select Board. So moved.
Second.
Second, all right. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Aye, ayes have it. Thank you, everyone.
And the Wenham Select Board adjourn at 7:53. Second.
Second.
Roll call vote.
Yes.
Pete says yes, Diane says yes.
Gary, yes. We're adjourned.
Okay. And I'll take a motion if the school committee offering one.
I move we adjourn at 7:54.
Second.
Second by Julia. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, it's unanimous, and we are adjourned.
Move the Finance,
I'm sorry,
Wenham
FinCom,
Finance
sorry.
Committee adjourns. Hear a motion, second for that, please.
Second.
Seconded. All those in favor of adjournment? Okay, thank you.